So we're going to meet our guests.
Yeah.
We've got some incredible guests today. We have Clara del Villar. She's the founder of Hispanic Free Market Network and advisor to Fueling Us Forward. We also have David Kanter, professor of environmental studies at NYU. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
for being
Here. All right, so let's start with President Trump's executive order to roll back regulations from President Obama's Clean Air Plan. That was one thing that happened this week, but on top of that, President Trump also cleared the way for the Keystone XL pipeline to proceed, or at least said that they will grant approval to it. So let's look at what our Twitter audience thinks about this. The Bold poll has people actually pretty split down the middle on this issue, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, there we have it.
David, first things first, can we just talk about, I think it's hard for people to look at everything that's being passed and to be able to keep track of it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not just a Keystone XL pipeline, it's not just the Clean Power Plan, it's not just what's in the budget and how that might affect our UN funding or as well as EPA funding. You know, where do you see the priorities being here of the Trump administration based on what they want to cut, what they want to legislate so far?
Well, you're right. I mean, the recent executive order is really trying to undo in as most complete a way as possible President Obama's climate legacy, right? So at the heart of that is the Clean Power Plan, which was planning to try and cut carbon pollution by about 32% from existing coal power plants around the United States, which was the central plank. But they're doing much more than that, too. They're trying to get rid of a moratorium on coal leasing on federal lands. They're trying to get rid of regulations that control methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas too. And then with the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines, all the rationale for these, and this is at the center of a lot of these arguments, the rationale, whether it be energy independence or jobs, they don't hold water at all. Whenever you look at the facts, these arguments justifying these kind of executive orders don't hold facts, and we can talk more about that, but that's where I'll stop.
Can you talk a little bit more about the energy independence argument? Because jobs come and go. You know, there's the jobs that are gained from building the pipeline aren't necessarily going to be there when they're finished, right. Even though there would be a lot of economic development in the region, especially in the Gulf Coast area. But talk a little bit about the energy independence argument, because I personally think that's a great, we'd love to, have more energy independence. So why is that not a good argument for these pipelines?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important for people to understand the facts of energy. There's been so much emotion around the debate that the reality is that our country and our world still runs on energy. Electrical generation is 33% coal, 33% natural gas, 20% nuclear, and barely and 7% hydro. So only 5% comes from alternative energy, solar and wind. The reason for that is because the technology is not ready for scale. And so we get lost in these controversial discussions about what's happening when the technology is not ready yet for renewables to become scalable.
But is the technology not ready because we're not investing in it and we're choosing to continue down a path of supporting fossil fuels?
I actually was in the industry, energy technology, 10 years ago and worked with the Energy and Environmental Research Center. Hundreds of billions of dollars has been poured into solar and wind. It's gotten slightly better, but it lacks one key ingredient, energy storage. These technologies are intermittent. So when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, the turbines that provide electricity are not functional. When I see in the media all the time that Tesla is doing great things, but electric cars run on electricity, which is fossil fuel generated. So as much as we feel disappointed by this issue, those are the facts. And it takes a long time to really create the chemistry and the technology to make that happen. Yeah. And I am optimistic, but I think you're looking far down the future. I think energy independence in North America is an extremely important thing for a whole range of reasons. In addition to job creation, we have a low-income and middle-income population here that needs low energy prices. Yeah. Education is up 200%, healthcare is up 100%. Low energy prices help this population.
Yeah. But what I feel like, and I want to hear from you, David, too, is I feel like we're not looking to the future. Right? Just to me, based on the way that the Trump administration, but Republicans too in general, it's not like he's pulling these policies out of a hat and there's something that Republicans in general don't agree with. It's choosing short-term gain, short-term profit, short-term job creation. Even as you mentioned, the Keystone XL might create a couple thousand jobs while it's being built, and then permanently only 50 jobs. So we're still not dealing with the fact that we are making the planet uninhabitable for the future.
I think that's totally right. I think we often focus, particularly in this country, on one side of that cost-benefit analysis, right? The cost of transforming our energy system in a way that is safe for the climate, right? But what we don't talk about often is the cost of inaction, of business as usual. And the fact is that the number of billion-dollar extreme weather events keep on increasing, and they're often suffered in states that voted for Donald Trump, right? Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, right? Those are the states that are going to be on the front line of climate change. As for renewable energy, there are already countries around the world that get more than 50% of their energy from renewables. And in this country, there are more people employed in the solar industry than in all the fossil fuel industries combined. And now solar energy is getting very close to being cost competitive with coal. So I think they are ready for prime time, and issues of storage are being resolved. And then on the question of energy independence, when it comes to something like the Keystone and Dakota Access Pipeline, fact is that oil, that very dirty oil from the tar sands up in Canada, is getting transported to the Gulf Coast to then be exported. So it's not actually helping the U.S. become energy independent at all. We're the stopover. And so we get 35 permanent jobs. Okay, great. But then we also get the environmental risks that are associated with that, with potential spills and all the environmental and human health concerns that go along with that. So really, it's a raw deal.
So, yeah, I just want to point out real quick, Susharaya, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, says France is the most environmentally friendly country because they are nuclear. So bringing up the topic
Exactly.
of nuclear. Yeah,
Exactly.
Clara, did you have something to add about that?
Nuclear is without question the most scalable. And again, the topic, and I have to beg to differ with some of the facts that David provides, simply because I understand the interest in moving forward. And again, remember, solar and wind are intermittent energies. So when these items are not running, what Europe does not is not frank enough in disclosing is that natural gas provides baseload generation in the evenings when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. Baseload generation. Always remember to ask that question. It's natural gas.
Can I interject just for
Can I
1 minute?
finish?
I mean,
Yeah, let me finish.
natural gas and oil are also finite resources.
Not
where
necessarily.
The sun and the wind
Not
aren't.
necessarily. Now remember, if you look at the data on natural gas and what's happening with fracking, and I understand how people feel emotionally disturbed by it, it's getting cleaner. Natural gas has 80 to 90%. It's 50% cleaner than coal. Okay, it's becoming around the globe a significant electricity fuel. And essentially, back to nuclear, it does provide all of France's power because when the oil crisis happened in the 70s, France turned to nuclear. In the United States, I think the industry is dying. Westinghouse.
What do you mean by not necessarily? I want to harp on this
necessarily.
point for a minute, that the natural gas and oil aren't finite resources, because the problem is that we now are using riskier techniques. We're having to go farther out in order to
Riskier
drill
techniques
for oil.
is your word. Riskier techniques is your word. Remember, let's
oil
look at
spills
this.
are happening, right?
Oil spills-
The ocean is devastated. It's having environmental impacts. And
I'm
consequences.
not arguing with the notion. I'm saying what is. We can wish this, but the reality is that energy production has gotten significantly cleaner and much more productive in the last several years. It's unmistakable. Otherwise, natural gas would not have been able to replace coal. Remember, coal was 50% of electricity generation. It is now 30%. That happened because natural gas prices dropped, and it became much more easier to build the plants and distribute the energy.
Right, but it can continue to get cleaner. It can continue to get safer if you move in other directions. But you still didn't answer my question. What do you mean by not necessarily those are finite resources?
The reality is being shown that we have trillions and trillions and trillions of cubic feet of energy resources in North America, in Mexico, and in Canada, offshore. And the offshore drilling and the offshore excavation is able to unleash much more of those resources than people realize.
I have a question. So the Paris Agreement, it obviously is heralded as this, major global movement to stop climate change. But I'm curious if David, you can give me a window into, first of all, how is the Paris Agreement going to keep some of the world's largest polluters, like China in particular, from abiding to this agreement? And I think I've read some things like it only really stops the temperature from rising, like it's not even going to make a real impact on global temperature. So why is this, heralded as this is the bill to stop climate change, number one? And number two, don't you see some hope in the fact that there was a bipartisan group of legislators this week, both Republicans and Democrats, that came together and said, okay, Republicans are not going to be the party of denial anymore. We all want to work together to be more innovative insofar as energy is concerned.
So on both, yeah. So both big questions. So first one, Paris Climate Agreement. It's the first international agreement that brings every single country to the table, where every country in the world puts a plan forward, what is ambitious, what is politically feasible in their own domestic context for dealing with climate change, right? So one of the biggest signals that Paris was going to be a success back in 2015 was when the United States and China jointly announced their targets together, right? And while the U.S. hasn't withdrawn yet from the Paris Climate Agreement, what these domestic actions do is they send a signal to the rest of the world that this is not a priority for the United States. And the leadership that the United States showed was really important in getting other countries to the table and being ambitious in their own actions. As to whether the Paris Climate Agreement is effective, the most important part of the Paris Climate Agreement is what is called the ratchet, which is every 5 years, countries are going to come together and re-up their commitments, right? So what they put forward in 2015 is just the opening bet. Right? And so they're going to keep coming together as this signal to the global marketplace, which Paris Climate Agreement was. It lowers the price of technologies that are cleaner, better for the environment. They'll be able to get more ambitious over time. Now, it will, because each country comes to the table, it means that if the U.S. isn't there or is less ambitious, that still allows for countries to do that. But that lack of ambition that the U.S. was bringing to the table will make it much harder to reach this 2-degree target that a lot of climate scientists talk about, also climate scientists talk about. As to the bipartisan caucus, this country is kind of just a weird country when it comes to climate change.
This is a weird country,
It's a weird country.
Weird is a nice way to put it.
Well,
yeah.
so...
Okay, we're diverse, right? It's
a great
diverse
country.
viewpoint.
It is it's a great
weird
country.
In a good
I love
way,
this,
like a good weird,
but
a
just
good weird.
But weird on this, weird on this point, right? In the sense that every other major country, the whole political spectrum, there is a fundamental agreement on the facts of climate change, right? All a Democrat needs to do in this country is say climate change is real, and that's their climate platform, right? There are so many important discussions that need to be had in this country on climate change. You were mentioning nuclear before. That's a really important discussion.
Yeah.
The Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works last week passed a resolution for new licensing for advanced nuclear reactors. That went completely unnoticed, right? That is something that should be at the heart of a discussion in this country. But because we're going back and forth as to whether there's a consensus, whether there's not, and there is.
The permitting will be hard on that. The permitting will be very
But we don't
difficult.
even get to that discussion.
Correct.
Because this
Correct.
and so hopefully this bipartisan caucus will move that forward. But to be fair, there doesn't seem to be any appetite within the White House for this kind of discussion at all.
Well, so in terms of, when we have this conversation about facts and where we stand as a country with facts, we have a weird relationship with them
is
as
facts.
well.
Technology is facts.
Yeah, but no,
right?
I just want to
So-
ask a question. It's if you look at the way that Donald Trump is trying to sell his climate plan, when he was signing this executive order the other day, he had a bunch of coal miners behind him, right? But even people from the coal industry will say these jobs aren't coming back. What's the reason these jobs are gone is because of automated technology that has replaced the need for so many individual workers. There also was a story the other day about the Energy Department not being able, was it the Energy Department or the EPA? Yeah, the Energy Department, Climate Office banning the use of the word climate change. I don't understand what universe we exist in where we think that we can achieve anything if we just try to scrub
So forget
scrub
that
the
stuff.
conversation
Forget that
clean.
stuff. If you want innovation,
But it's real. I don't want to
know,
forget it
know.
because it's what's
But
actually
listen,
happening.
We can move beyond it. And in 1996, I'm going to give you an example. The reason you have that Samsung or iPhone right there is not because we banned landline phones. The reason you have it is because in 1996 there was a Telecommunications Act in the Clinton administration that brought together all of the telecom companies that were almost monopolies then, that didn't want to change anything. And the administration worked with the those entities to promulgate change. What we've been doing is castigating the power plants. And I don't know if you've ever visited a utility or power companies. These people aren't Goldman Sachs, innovative Apple. They're basically just doing their job, pumping out electricity in a transmission system that was invented 100 years ago. Our transmission lines have not changed since Thomas Edison admitted them. There's been no evolution. If we want change in energy in a major way, you have to rebuild an electrical transmission system that has not been modernized.
But your
And
example is a great example of
Yeah.
the iPhones, because that shows the important
Innovation.
role. It shows the important role of government also in
Right.
stimulating
True.
that innovation. And the fact is, when we talk about the castigation that fossil fuel companies have had, the fact is that
Oh,
there
power
are
companies.
and power companies.
Right.
They get $500 billion of fossil fuel subsidies, right,
No,
around the world.
Utilities don't.
Right, but
because they're regulated.
I understand, but just in terms of picking winners and losers, which is an often argument of not investing in renewable energy research, the fact is that the status quo right now unfavorably or very favorably favors fossil fuel production.
Okay, and this is something that I'm actually concerned about, because I as a young person, I think young people really care about energy being cheaper, being cleaner.
yes.
None of us want a bunch of waste. We're not like, yes, let's kill the environment. We're trying to find the best way to work together to do this. What concerns me, because we all see that the need for innovation is clear, and the innovation in our technologies across the board. What concerns me is that there are about 70,000 jobs in coal. That's what's been reported in the last couple days right now. A big part of the president's pitch to voters in West Virginia and coal mining country was, we're going to bring all these coal jobs back. And that has been this push. But now China is investing and really going to become the world's player on, exporting goods for, renewable energy. So are we losing out on potentially a global trade position where we can be, the driver of this innovation globally? Are we just kind of going back and taking ourselves out of the
China's
we're
actually
still
cutting its coal plant.
Well, let me clarify that, because I have been in China
please.
and I have seen the coal-fired plants.
Yeah,
First of
please.
all, the United States was GE invented superheating capacity in coal-fired plants that reduces CO2 emissions by 40%. That's a
amazing.
U.S. invention.
That's amazing.
No one knows that. There has been scrubber technology that has been decades old since the Clean Energy Act, going back, that took away of particulates, nitrous oxide, sodium dioxide, and fly ash that really cause health issues. China has not done that. And why not? They have 1.4 billion people.
I know.
They have to provide electricity to people that make $1 a day.
And that's a humanitarian
And so
issue as well.
It is a humanitarian issue. And so they're going to have more solar energy. Of course they will, because they're a huge country. But is that really going to take the place of coal-fired plants? Absolutely not. But to use your point, which is legitimate, in that they have used a marketing role, which they say, look, if the U.S. isn't going to be a part of this, then why should we be a part of this? The Paris Agreement doesn't include China and India until 2030. But still, the U.S. does have a leadership role, whether it's ceremonial or whether it's real. It's important.
And so
Because these countries,
why are
India's in
we
the same position.
abdicating that role, and why aren't we the ones then? If you mentioned all these other innovations that came from the United States,
Right.
why aren't we
They're just
also
a few.
then?
There are many more.
Right, but why
right,
aren't we
yes.
leading the charge when it comes to renewable energy
Right.
too?
The Stone
We
Age
are.
didn't. The
We
Stone Age
are.
didn't end for lack of stone, right? So China is not the lead producer of wind turbines and solar panels because it is the biggest environmentalist on the planet.
Right.
It is
No,
the lead
definitely
producer
not.
of wind
Considering
turbines
the
and
smog
solar
there.
panels because it sees a massive economic opportunity. And as you say, we're abdicating that role. The other thing I would mention is we often focus on the costs to consumers, right, of that there might be a slight increase in energy prices. What we often don't focus on, for example, President Trump has talked about repealing the fuel efficiency standards, right, for cars, which would save on the lifetime of a car $3,000 to $5,000 for a consumer, right? That's a consumer cost right there. There's a consumer cost for living near a coal power plant or where the cost of asthma, emphysema, various respiratory diseases, right? And then when you talk about countries like China and India, that there are massive portions of their populations that need access to energy. But the fact is that there are ways to get that energy that are not fossil intensive, and that those populations are often on the front lines of climate change, right? The poorest and most vulnerable are often the least resilient to the impacts of climate change.
Absolutely.
So there is this really important challenge, right? And really important discussions that need to be had. How much finance are they going to need? What kind of mix of energy? But if we just focus on these quite early questions in the discussion, we're never going to get to these important questions, or they're going to get resolved by not in a transparent way.
And you made a really great point about the economic issue. And ExxonMobil recently announced that they don't want to necessarily see some of these things revoked, repealed.
The Paris Climate Agreement.
The Paris Climate Agreement in particular. And so I think also we need, and I think that they are slowly, I think that corporations, American corporations, that energy corporations also need to help lead the way.
And they are.
And changing.
They are. They're
Right.
speaking out.
They absolutely
speaking out, no
are. And
question
I'm
about it.
thankful for ExxonMobil doing that. I
GE.
think others should follow. Yes, should follow suit. But I think, and you keep going back to, why is America abdicating their role, or, why is the Trump administration not doing this per se? And that's where I think that, as a conservatarian, as someone who was on the center right and was not a big Trump fan coming into, the election, I think that what the Trump administration says and what the rest of the party kind of feels like is the wave of the future can sometimes be two very different things. And so you have a president in the White House who's very savvy and conscious of his base and like putting out there what is the most tweetable, marketable thing to say and thing to do, right now. But I think that you've got people working behind the scenes in policy and think tanks, et cetera, who are kind of more focused on the wave of the future and finding common ground.
Savvy though, I feel like sometimes we just see Donald Trump tweeting in his nightmares or in the middle of the night, and then nobody knows what's happening or where it came from.
Well, and I hope
no
you're
one
right.
can control it.
But when you look at congressional Republicans, they had a hearing a couple of days ago where they just invited a bunch of climate deniers to air their views. You have Jim Inhofe, who was the chairman of the Environment and Public Works in the Senate for a while. These are people with power and influence in the Republican Party, and they are clearly sending the message. And also, even though Exxon has come out in favor of the Paris Climate Agreement, their actions over the past decades do not speak well for them.
Exxon has known for years about
Exxon has
climate
known
change.
for years. And the fact that now our representative abroad is the former CEO of Exxon doesn't necessarily speak volumes about our commitment necessarily to dealing with climate
Let me
change.
ask this too, in terms of, I think that what the Trump administration has been running into thus far is realizing that you can't just rule by executive decree in this country. Obviously, that's why we have a democracy and you have the courts.
Well, Obama kind of had an issue with that as well.
Yeah, all presidents, once they get in there, they have to work with Congress.
you
They're like,
can see,
executive
you're gonna see
orders.
a lot of legal challenges.
Definitely not the
right?
first.
That's something that happened with the immigration and the deportation order, and that's already something you're seeing environmentalist groups say that they're going to sue about the Keystone XL pipeline. Because it needs to have an environmental impact report, and the one that it's currently based on, they say, is out of date. So how much of what Donald Trump is trying to do right now is potentially going to be stalled, due to lengthy legal difficulties and congressional blockage?
I hope you're right, but it's true that there are a lot of ways for environmental groups to hold up this agenda. Right. It'll also depend on the balance of the Supreme Court, right, and what happens there. But yes, this will be held up. But again, in the grander scheme of things, we don't have much time, right? If we want to stay or have a reasonable chance of staying below 2 degrees, right? What we're doing now is losing momentum on the momentum that was created after Paris, right? So we're losing 5 to 10 years in terms of our ability to continue to reduce our emissions. So while, yes, it may be held up in the courts, it might not be as, the doomsday scenario of completely repealing everything, we still will have lost action, and the next president, who I hope is a Democrat, will have to first build back what's been lost. That will in itself probably take a presidential term.
But let me correct, if I may, also. Emissions in the United States have actually been declining. Why have they been declining? Again, because we've been substituting coal for natural gas. Because natural gas got very, very inexpensive, and fracking brought out a whole lot of it. And if you see today's Wall Street Journal, there's a piece that talks about how even more is going to come out cleaner because of technology. But the point is that our emissions have actually been decreasing in addition to losing manufacturing capabilities, to China. So we actually are streamlining a lot of our technologies cleaner, better, and more productive.
But why? I guess the question is, why is it that our emissions were lowering? Some in part to new technology that's been developed, but also government subsidies, right? And the Obama administration, as you mentioned, heavily
and on natural gas, just on the
market's done that.
The market
The market's
drives things
done that.
much faster than policy.
I agree that
generally.
there are certain
you can't.
inevitable economic trends
Fuel
that'll
efficiency is not
occur
an
regardless
Obama.
of
Yeah,
policy.
It didn't come with Obama. It came much before Obama. In fact, a lot of these clean power elements came out way before Obama. He just tried to stop a lot of coal plant construction, but that was already happening, you see. So the point that I would say is, look, I mean, I don't doubt, I don't quibble with the notion that Trump's rhetoric is harsh. But the point is that I would say, why not make recommendations? Say, look, if you want infrastructure projects, no more infrastructure bonanza would happen, rebuilding the transmission grid. You would create white-collar jobs, blue-collar jobs.
That's a great idea. Let's write him. Let's tweet him.
The transmission grid is 100 years old. If Thomas Edison came down today, he would recognize it. If Alexander Graham Bell came down, he would not know what that is. So if we
That is so embarrassing.
It's a time for transformation and a time to help people understand technology. I'm not arguing with the notion that we should be concerned about our environment.
I mean, President Obama has been trying to change, for example, do things that would modernize the electricity grid for both of his terms, and it has been because
I
it's the
didn't see any
obstructionism.
technology issues that
It's
he,
because of the obstructionism of Republicans in
I
Congress.
actually know his technology. He did not. He basically mandated stopping coal-fired plants, stopping Keystone Pipeline. He did not speak about the transmission infrastructure once.
They tried to pass legislation, but they couldn't because of Republicans in Congress. And then on that, just natural gas, just quickly, it is. You're right that if
It's much cleaner.
It is cleaner, but because of what President Trump did earlier this week, where part of the executive order is to get rid of regulations on methane, and methane is a really powerful greenhouse
what
gas,
issues
which is
the
a
most
byproduct.
methane around the globe?
Wait,
David's thought. Let's hear him out.
That if you overturn that regulation that would control methane, then pretty much all the benefits of it being cleaner get wiped off, right? So then natural gas.
Absolutely false. Methane.
not.
Do you know what issues methane the most? Manure, animal manure, has a methane
big source.
content that is 400% higher than natural gas. You know, and
That
the
doesn't mean
reality,
that when you burn
the
natural
rea-
gas, it's not as
when
clean
you
as coal.
burn
It's not.
natural gas, you burn off the methane. You know, when you talk about methane in the water, the whole the methane comes out of coal mines. It comes out of mines. It's much less prevalent in natural gas production.
But the problem is you get the leaks
Because
of
it's
methane.
well-
It's
Yeah,
not when you
I
burn it,
think
you
that,
get the leaks.
what
But
we're
anyway,
talking
yes.
about here, though, is the fact that we need to be able to have these conversations and
Yes.
to deal with
Yes,
facts.
yes.
No, but
And-
but what you're saying is what Donald Trump is doing is it's not just rhetoric. He's actually taking legislative action and signing executive orders, but he's also dealing on lies, with this idea that we're going to be bringing back jobs, especially to the coal industry. And so we need to get to a place in the country where when we have these conversations about how to move forward, about energy independence, we're actually dealing in fact as our currency rather than just making things up.
Yeah, and I think that, and he hasn't done any legislative action on it yet, just executive orders. But I at least am hopeful. I mean, thank you both for sharing your wisdom so much, because these kind of details aren't really talked about so much, and it's so great. And also, I'm hopeful and optimistic because I see a younger generation who's really desires, right, to have cleaner energy, to have innovation and technology drive the way and really lead and have America lead in the cleaner front. And so that makes me feel optimistic, because when you need to have the desire there from the consumer in order to help drive some of this, and to call their senators and their congressmen and tell them,
How about joining the energy? We want more women
Yes,
in
yes,
energy
women in
industry,
STEM
more
fields,
women
exactly.
in these areas that can see and do things and
Exactly.
make things happen.
And
So
yeah,
this isn't just
young people do care.
And well, yeah,
Thankfully,
and
we care about the environment.
and right.
Meat consumption is going down. You talk about methane. I mean, all of this falls into what we need to do to be living
Yeah.
sustainably, which is also reducing
Yep.
our reliance on meat as part of our diet.
And we'll wrap up this segment. We are so glad to have you guys. And just,
you for having us.
one thing to add there too, that when these kind of, because you mentioned the multi-billion-dollar disasters, right? This, at the end of the day, I think is a humanitarian issue, right? And so what young people have done a great job of doing, and other faith groups, nonprofits, NGOs have gone to these sites like Nepal after the earthquake, have gone to Haiti, have gone to Pakistan after those massive floods, have gone to places to volunteer and help these communities. And so long as we keep that, also that readiness to go help and serve people who've been in the front lines of this battle, I think that too is to be commended.
But let's also try to prepare rather than only respond.
Prevention and response.
Indeed.
Both
Yes.
working together.
Happen, yeah. Of course. Thank you both so
Thank
much.
you
Thank
both
you.
so much.
Pleasure.
Right.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, so Clara Del Villar from Fueling Us Forward and David Kanter from NYU. Thanks, guys. Well, got to have you back.